I am a huge fan of any comic book that's about the creative process. So when I was at my local shop and I spotted Animeta, started flipping through it, and I realized, oh my god, this is about making anime. Now, there is many a manga about making anime or making manga. Oftentimes, it can be structured over something else, like a romantic comedy or more shonen trope, for example, like in Bakuman. But what was notable about Animeta when I started flipping through it was that it was very deep into the trenches of the animation process. Specifically, the kind of nitty-gritty that builds the bulk of what animation is, but rarely gets discussed very often because it's not that dramatic. And by that I mean, this is all about in-betweeners. So if you've seen animation and you see something that's smooth or not, in-betweeners are the ones that are kind of the people behind it. They are the ones that draw the frames between the big actions. And all of this is explained in this manga. So it was written by Yaso Hanamura. This is a pen name for a woman that has been an animator her entire life. She understands the subject so thoroughly that it's kind of fascinating how deep it can get. So this manga was published in Morning 2, which was a manga magazine that's published monthly. Again, I've talked about this before when I've talked about manga. I think that the weekly schedule of doing 21 pages is absolutely torture, should not exist. Monthly manga is the best way that it exists because the people doing it can actually write proper stories and pace them correctly. But speaking of stuff that's stressed, animation is one of the most underpaid creative jobs that demand the most work in Japan. The series is about a young woman, let me see if I can find her on this, that loves a specific anime series so much that she wants to join the studio that makes it. And she eventually does, passing the test that allows her to become an in-betweener, even though the people around her realize that she doesn't even know the fundamentals of what it takes to be an animator. Mostly she gets in because the director sees something in her, an attention to detail, a notice of how things work that goes beyond technical chops and into the, just having a feeling for it. Now, I say that, making it sound like this manga is about some kind of specifically gifted person that comes to it and maybe goes over some obstacles, but in the 5-volume run, the main character doesn't really move from beyond her station. She starts as an in-betweener, and the manga explains an in-betweener is someone that, again, draws in between the keyframes. So, for example, if I were to, make a fist, and I'm going towards it, the key animator would draw this fist, and then would draw this action of the fist going towards the next big action. The in-betweener draws every little motion in between those two, hence, in-betweeners. It is a very hard work, one that takes a lot of drawing, and the people that do it often don't really get any attention. It's difficult because you have to imitate everyone's style on the productions that you're working with, so there is no kind of break in the continuity. And this main character in the story, she deals with all the issues that people that would get into animation have to do, like how do you make it look normal? How do you make it not look like the characters are melting when they're doing big actions on screen? I know I'm getting really into the weeds with this. You may not find it interesting, but I absolutely do. Specifically because animation is something that I consume so much of, and I think I know the basics of how it works. But once you start breaking it down, once you get into the workflow of storyboarding, layouts, key animation, in-betweening, cleanup, all these people that work on it that do a lot of important stuff, but we don't usually associate because they have to be kind of chameleons in the way they work. And this is all that this manga is about. Of course, you have the heroic director figure, as you can see here. You have our main protagonist right here. You have her rivals. This is not really shonen in the sense that it's not really constructed in battles or things that need to be overcome, because it spends so much more time just basically being a slice of life. With a little bit, we need to get to the next step. But again, that next step is very far away for this main character because she gets into the studio, she has people who wonder why she's there, the director seemingly has trust in her, she meets her supervisor who is an in-between checker, and an in-between checker is someone that has to look at all of the cuts, they're called, which are basically like shots of animation, and make sure that they're correct, that they flow, and actually redraw them and fix them, which is called cleanup, for them to be actually sent and be processed. And this manga really gets into the kind of process of in-between checkers, how much work they do, and how little respect they actually get, because, people don't really think of, oh, maybe the key animators did really sloppy work and the in-betweeners had to come in and fix it. We can't be conscious of that because there's so many moving parts. And it really gets into, like, how does someone get into that job for multiple years? Why don't they move up to more creative things? What satisfaction do you get out of that? At the same time, this manga is about, what if you're not a genius? What if you're just not someone who gets to it, just understands it instinctively? What does it take to work through it? What is the process that you have to go through to get to the next step? And I mean, the author knows because she's worked in the trenches for so long. She worked at like Production IG. She animated on the Neon Genesis Evangelion movies as a key animator. So she went basically to the highest level that you can as far as being a key animator before getting into the director chair. I thought this manga was absolutely delightful. Taught me a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't know about the process. The character work is really good. Again, this was a monthly manga, so there's very firm pacing that you can follow the characters as they go through their journey, and they grow, in little pieces. Of course, you get backstories of characters that appear seemingly two-dimensional at first and really understand what motivates them as you go along. And the art style, I will say, is very clean. Almost a little generic, but it's this cleanliness that kind of really cements its slice of lifeness. And the author actually talks about in some of the end notes that like she felt very uncomfortable with how some of the stuff was illustrated, and she kept going back and forth. And I think that the art is just very indicative that the person that did this did a lot of animation. And I haven't been able to find that much information about this manga online. Mostly some Reddit posts of people being like, oh, is someone going to translate it? Is it finally going to come out? It's very interesting. There hasn't been a hook. It's never been animated, which is usually what leads to popularity of manga. So it's almost like surprising that it got an English language release in the first place. And while I don't believe it's still in print, it's still very available. And it's not something that, like, if you look on any online reseller, that it's going for hundreds of dollars. So there's 5 volumes. I will say it does end on a cliffhanger. And the author actually explains why. She had a lot of issues early on that, like, she thought it was going to be canceled. One of her editors actually said that she should wrap it up in 4 volumes. But thanks to the word of mouth through the internet, she was able to actually get it out there. And then she talks about she had a cancer diagnosis followed by pregnancy, which led to twins. And she hasn't really been picked up since the 5th volume, which actually came out in 2020. And the first one, I believe, was written in either 2016 or 2017, the first chapter. So it's one that's been on and off throughout. If you look online, it still says ongoing because it doesn't really have a firm cancellation, or there hasn't been any announcement of it coming back, so it's up in the air. And the author is actually pretty active on Twitter, and you can see that she is doing other stuff. It seems that she's illustrating some Pokemon comics, and she talks a lot about the 2 daughters that she's been raising as well. If you want a look into what goes into animation from the lowliest position possible, I highly recommend picking up Animeta. It is published by J Novel Club, who mostly deal in translations of Japanese like light novels, but they also do a bunch of manga. And this is one of the notable ones that I'm really happy could come out and get a perspective into an industry that usually doesn't get tackled that much. And even if you're not that interested in animation, you can consider this as something that is about the creative process, what it takes to stay in a job and figure out solutions to problems. There's a lot of processes that are explained in this. Like, some of the end chapters actually have breakdowns of, okay, what is the pipeline? Whose job is to do what? This is how you lay out an animation frame and let the in-betweener know how many frames has to be in this. Stuff that you don't usually think about because it's such a technical process, but is laid out here in a very clear, compelling way that is also inspirational in the way that the main character wants to go to the next level. But every step of the way, she's hitting stumbling blocks of her own knowledge and her own skill. And even where it ends, like, I was very impressed that it's willing to put up barriers in front of the characters that in any other kind of story like this, they would cross and go to the next level, but it treats it more realistically about what it means to be in an industry that you need to learn to actually keep going and what it means to hold on and, at the end of the day, love what you're doing. If you enjoyed this video, I would highly recommend checking out the Very Fine Comic Book Podcast, which is a podcast that I do with Mike Wood, where we go through every episode a new book. We usually read 1 or 2 volumes of it. It can be manga, it can be North American comics, superhero comics, underground comics, comics from around the world, and we want it to be kind of like introductions to the subject. And so you don't really need to know it, you don't need to have read it. It's not a book club. It's just us talking about it in a kind of, exploratory way. And at the end, most of the time, we want you to read the book, and hopefully we give you enough context to explore them. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.